everyone. This is Alicia, and welcome back to the Evening Podcast. Y'all, it is Saturday. What's today? Today is April 11th. And so I actually was going to interview someone today for the podcast, but unfortunately that didn't work out. But I was like, you know what? There's something that I did want to share with you all and just kind of talk through um, anyway. And I thought, you know what, now that, the opportunity of me not interviewing someone, kind of fell through, this is the perfect opportunity to talk about these things. And, you know, the concern around just the mental health of Americans right now is something I've been thinking about for a while because we're constantly bombarded with information. We wake up, we pick up our phones, we find out the latest insanity that's happening, not just in America, but across the globe, right? What has Trump done today? What is his actual, the folks that, work under him, what have they done or what is happening with this war? It's constantly something that, we're being, front loaded with, and then we have to go on with our day. Um, and so it's crazy, I think a lot of us are just trying to just make it each and every day. Just, go to work or whatever you do and just try to present like things are okay when we know that's not the case, right? But I found this article from Time that I thought was pretty interesting. It was actually published on the 9th of April, and it's titled America's Moral Injury Pandemic. And as I was reading through this, I was like, oh, this is something uh, that I would love to share with you all and just kind of like, process as we are just dealing with some of the most insane things that many of us have experienced in our lifetimes. So, like I said, it's an article. I'll share it in the show notes. It's called America's Moral Injury Pandemic. And it starts off, it says, it's your first day at a new job. With no explanation, you're asked to separate parents from their young children without warrant, without explanation, without visible due process. You try to get insulin to your detained mother. No one can tell you where she is, much less whether she is receiving medical care. Masked men shatter your neighbor's car windows and force them into an unmarked vehicles. You fumble with your phone to film what's happening, powerless to stop it. For some Americans, these situations are not hypotheticals. For others, they they arrive as virtual shockwaves, grainy videos of detention, headlines about American citizens killed during enforcement actions, stories of infants and toddlers incarcerated despite being born here. Whether you are directly involved or watching from a distance, these events land somewhere inside you. They destabilize us not simply because they are violent or tragic, but because they betray some fundamental aspect of personal conscience. A line that once felt secure now appears to have broken. Codes of conduct you've always relied on are twisted or ignored. These psychological ruptures in a recognized clinical condition, and it has a name: moral injury. The wide-reaching impacts of moral injury, goes on, the article does. Originally studied in combat veterans, moral injury describes the harm that occurs when people witness or participate in acts that betray their deepest moral beliefs and feel unable to stop them. First, I encountered this condition as a U.S. Air Force I guess it's SEER psychologist deployed to Afghanistan. And maybe if I don't know if that's SEER, if it's like an acronym, SERE. But yeah, we'll continue. I was charged with upholding the Geneva Conventions in detention and interrogation operations and advising on personal recovery. Working in high attrition, especially screened SEER programs or SERE programs alongside special operations units, I watched moral injury surface in real time, often when conscious collided with policy. As a veteran, I know how devastating the long term impact of moral injury can be. Research shows that repeated exposure, to such violation can fracture identity, distort meaning, and produce despair that is distinct from fear-based trauma. Moral injury is formally recognized as a unique mental health condition by the American Psychological Association, or the APA, and is included in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorders, so it's the DSM, the handbook U.S. mental health care providers use to classify and diagnose patients with mental health conditions. But one of the complexities of moral injury is that it does not stay contained within an individual. If we do not confront and address the moral injury, it can have grave consequences for civil society. When left to spread untreated, it can reshape civil life. Every time our conscience registers a profound wrong and nothing changes, something inside us absorbs the blow. Most of the time, the symptoms are quiet: a tightening in the chest, a surge of anger, a sinking disbelief, a sinking disbelief, and we tell ourselves to just move on. But the damage accumulates, forming a network of cracks in one's moral compass. Over time, repeated exposure without accountability produces one of these reactions: hardening, numbing, or withdrawal. Some people double down and justify what they see. Others detach entirely. Many simply stop believing that moral action matters. Those reactions cause effects that ripple outward across families, communities, hollowing out democratic culture and threatening the moral fabric of society at large. When enough people quietly conclude that conscience is irrelevant to power, then democratic participation becomes performative. Compliance replaces conviction. Silence masquerades as stability. And I wanted to stop there because I thought, as I was reading through that and just, as we're processing all of this, I feel like at this time more than ever, this is so true and relevant. Because there are times, when we'll see something that'll come across our screen or we'll hear something on the news, and it's just so overwhelming that we'll skip it. Or if we hear it, it's just like, okay, another thing. Well, like, well, I'm not shocked. This is America. Like, of course we're doing this. Of course this is happening. Or we just completely ignore it, right? Or we're just feeling helpless. It's like, okay, what can I do? Like, what can I do to fix any of this? So I'm just going to just conduct business as usual, in total air quotes there, and just hope for the best. And I definitely agree with this article about this whole sense of us just kind of like feeling like we're withdrawn from what's going on in everyday society. And at the same time, I question if we are getting to a point where we're just, going to allow this to continue in this manner, or are we going to fight back? I mean, we're seeing a few things. I mean, if you're not aware, the man who set the Kimberly Clark factory ablaze with all the products. So you see little things happening here and there. But I do wonder if the collective is on that actual, or they have that mindset, or is it something that we're seeing where it's kind of like, you know what, I don't want to be the one to cause the problem, right? I just want to just live my life and, yeah, and not cause a rift. But I am concerned about, when we do have that thinking, how we can continue to move forward as a society and not try to provoke some type of change, uh, despite us being nervous to do that thing, if that makes sense. You know what I'm saying? The article goes on and says moral repair and resilience. The net result of widespread moral injury is that communities abandon those whose lives are most in danger and being physically and emotionally shattered. This is why moral repair is a crucial process of civic responsibility. Victims of the moral transgressions we witness today need more than our feelings. They need a citizenry whose moral compass still works, not just because it is the right thing to do, but because moral injury is a very real mental health condition and moral repair is part of the treatment. Untreated moral injury makes us ineffective advocates. It makes us reactive, brittle, and inert. Moral injury produces shame that turns inward, typically arises as depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation, and rage that turns indiscriminate, often in the form of anger, alcohol abuse, and relationship problems. It isolates us when we might otherwise act with discipline and clarity. Moral resilience, by contrast, preserves the capacity to respond without collapsing. Repair begins by rejecting the gaslighting, the excuses, immoral acts as necessary or even righteous. When actions violate core values, fairness, due process, human dignity, naming the violation matters. The goal is not to perform outrage, but to preserve moral orientation, to prevent the corrosion of conscience. Repair prioritizes moral coherence. Distress untethered from the meaning becomes despair. Placing events inside a moral framework, not a partisan one, but a human one, allows us to metabolize what we're witnessing instead of fragmenting under it. This process requires agency at a human scale. Large symptoms can feel immovable, but small visible acts aligned with conscience, insisting on local accountability, supporting victims of cruelty, refusing to normalize dehumanization in everyday conversation, restore the experience that moral presence still has force. This is not armchair therapy. It's infrastructure. When individuals preserve their own moral compass, they protect their capacity for disciplined collective action. They equip themselves and organize without forsaking compassion. To protest without losing perspective, to serve without surrendering integrity. The people whose lives are being actively broken today do not need our despair. They need our steadiness, and that steadiness is harder to sustain than grief or outrage. It demands that we resist both numbing and nihilism and that we remain morally awake without shattering. There is escalating danger in ignoring this internal dimension. When moral injury metastasizes, it can fuel extremism, suicidal despair, and retaliatory violence. Research among veterans show that unaddressed moral injury can produce profound hopelessness and self destruction. In civilian life, the dynamics are similar. A fractured conscience seeks relief, sometimes in destructive ways. The events that spark moral injury are real, but so is the risk of moral fragmentation to become our new normal. The underlying question is not simply what kind of country are we becoming, it is whether we can remain morally intact long enough to have any effect at all on our nation's future. And I'll share this article in the show notes, but I thought this was so profound, especially at this particular time, because like as I mentioned, the whole Kimberly Clark incident, this is something that springs from this. And I mentioned, can it be something that, you know, the repair is necessary so these things don't happen? I mean, obviously, but I feel like also if we want to, kind of like say yes and in a way, and you guys can totally disagree with me, but I think in some ways those actions, like the Kimberly Clark incident, can be a wake up call, hopefully for leadership, for them to realize, like, oh, we need to get in here and actually do something about this. Um, that would be the hope, right? Will it happen? I don't know. I highly doubt it. I hate to say it that way, but it can be, if you want to look at it in that way, it can be a wake up call for leadership as well to say, you know what, we have to change what we're doing. And that would be the hope, right? That they would change their stance. But as we see and as we know with this particular administration, it's not going to happen. Um, their actual ideology and how they want to, you know, play out this war and however you want to look at it is clearly not for the people. And so with that, I mean, like I said, we can have that argument. It's just something to think about. But like I said, it's probably not the most realistic one. Is how do we as the people create the change? Because they're not going to do it. Like you want to believe that, right? You want to believe that the leaders that are in office are really going to start looking at, okay, this is not working for the American people. Let's actually change how we're moving, but that's not the case. And so now it requires us as the people, as the people who have put these folks in office. I mean, and we can, I'm not here to debate who voted for Trump, who didn't. Like, we're so far beyond that at this point, guys. Like, it's just whatever. But these people are in office and they work for us. And we have to keep remembering that and not forget that their power is based off how we allow them to, manage and navigate this actual country. And until we start raising our voices and saying no more, you know, and finding ways to repair ourselves from all of this craziness, it's going to be business as usual. Um, and I think some of these things is us getting involved in the community and really just being, um, being familiar with who is in our community and who can we, come together with to create these new ways of, living in America. Because what was is not going to be how we move forward successfully to create something new in this country. Because what we knew as America, that's gone. And I think a lot of us have to just make peace with that because, a lot of people want to say, oh, I wish I could go back to this. And I don't know if you guys have seen these different videos on social media where folks are like, reminiscing about when they were a child and I wish I could go back to that time and blah, blah, blah. And those were, for some folks, that was a good time. But we have to move forward. We have to think about our future. We have to think about how we're going to plan and do our best to move forward in a new way. But that starts with us repairing the damage that has been done. And we have to find ways to do that. And like I said, that starts with us being out in the community and really learning who's in our communities and working with them to ensure that we are going to have a country where we feel safe, where we feel heard, where we feel like we can afford it. you know, all these things are super important. I'm going to share this article in the show notes. And, my charge is for us to truly start thinking about how we move forward and not constantly get caught up in all the stuff that we are exposed to each and every day in this country. Because honestly, I feel like a lot of those things, the news and all the things that we are shared or provided is just actually creating us to basically have this actual article shared. It's kind of like we're just constantly in injury and there's no repair. And we just have to find ways to repair ourselves. And that might mean us not, being consuming so much of the information that's out there. And like I said, get in the community and talk to the people that you're around. Because that's what's going to actually be the thing that's going to change us. And us changing ourselves and not being so self-centered and, wanting to have better for all of us as opposed to a select few. All right, y'all. I love y'all. Like I said, I'll share the article in the show notes. And thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Eating Podcast. I will see y'all next week. All right. Love you. Bye.